What do you mean Mason will be CEO? I'm the one who saved this hotel. My voice cut sharply through the grand new lobby of the Alpine Crest Lodge, reverberating off the sleek timber beams and stone walls I had chosen myself. For a fleeting second, the world stood still. The scent of fresh pine and the gentle hum of the check-in desk seemed to fade as I looked at my mother, whose dismissive wave felt like a slap across my face. Lena, sweetheart, your brother has the kind of vision we need right now. You're just too focused on the little things, Mom said, her tone as condescending as when she used to correct my table manners as a child. That's when Mason strolled in, hands stuffed into his designer jacket, his smirk as familiar as it was infuriating. Hey sis, he drawled, eyes gleaming with the same arrogance I'd endured since we were kids. Nothing personal. Someone's gotta handle the big picture stuff. My name is Lena Porter, and at 51 years old, I never thought I'd be battling for respect in the very place I dedicated my heart to saving. I'd carved out a successful 20-year career in hotel management in San Francisco, rising from front desk clerk to regional director. When Dad called me in tears 8 months ago, saying our beloved family hotel in the Colorado Rockies was on the brink of bankruptcy, I didn't hesitate. I sold my condo, cashed in every cent I'd saved, and returned home to rescue the Alpine Crest Lodge, the same lodge I'd once called my second home. The place was a time capsule from the 70s. Shag carpets, faded floral drapes, a reception system that crashed more than it worked, and online reviews that shredded what little reputation we had left. Night after sleepless night, I poured everything into transforming it, updating booking systems, renovating every inch of the lobby, retraining staff in service excellence. I called in every favor I had, got us featured in travel magazines, and turned Alpine Crest Lodge from a joke into a rising star. Guests began flooding in, and for the first time in years, we were operating in the black. But standing here now, watching Mason greet the staff with the swagger of a man who'd contributed nothing but empty words, I felt the burn of betrayal. Mom and Dad had decided that tonight's staff meeting, the one where I was supposed to reveal our record-breaking quarterly numbers, would instead be used to announce Mason's promotion to CEO. Our team deserved better. Sophia, our housekeeping supervisor of 20 years, caught my eye across the lobby. Her expression mirrored mine, disbelief mixed with quiet rage. Everyone here knew who had actually saved this place. But like me, they were expected to smile, clap, and pretend this farce was fair. I knew then that no amount of sacrifice would ever convince my family of my worth. As Mason's smirk widened and Mom rested a proud hand on his shoulder, something inside me shifted. I refused to let my sweat and sleepless nights be trampled under someone else's entitlement. That was the moment I realized, if they couldn't see what I'd built for them, I would build something even greater, for myself. The Alpine Crest Lodge wasn't just a hotel. It was a living, breathing piece of our family's story. My grandparents built it with their own hands in 1972, carving it out of the rugged mountain terrain and filling it with warmth and charm. Growing up, I practically lived in these halls. While other kids played make-believe, I was folding towels behind the laundry room, greeting guests alongside Dad, and sneaking into the kitchen to watch our chef prepare the day's specials. Every nook of this place felt like home, every creaky floorboard told a memory. For me, hospitality wasn't a job, it was a calling. That's why I pursued a degree in hotel and tourism management, determined to make my mark on the world before returning to the Alpine Crest with fresh skills. But life had other plans. When I graduated, my parents encouraged me to spread my wings elsewhere, to prove myself beyond the family business. So I went to San Francisco, where I spent 2 decades climbing the ranks of one of the biggest hotel chains in the country. I faced cutthroat colleagues, impossible deadlines, and the ever-present pressure of the city, but I thrived. By the time I was 40, I was leading multiple properties across California, known for my meticulous eye for detail and ability to turn around underperforming hotels. Meanwhile, Mason, 3 years my junior, seemed content to drift through life. He tried out architecture for a semester, then marketing. Before bouncing to a vague business studies program, he dropped out of altogether. Our parents never seemed worried. He's creative, Mom would say with a fond smile, as if creativity was a substitute for hard work. He'll figure it out eventually. While I was managing multi-million-dollar renovations, Mason was crashing on friends' couches, working odd jobs he never kept for more than a few months. Every time I called home, I'd hear about another of Mason's great ideas, an app he'd design, a startup he'd join, none of which ever materialized. Despite my successes, every holiday call from my parents ended the same way. "When are you coming home, Lena?" Or, "When will you settle down and start a family?" It was as if no matter how far I climbed or what milestones I hit, it would never be enough until I returned to Alpine Crest. When Dad's call came 8 months ago, his voice breaking as he confessed the hotel was weeks away from foreclosure, I didn't hesitate. I knew the place was my responsibility as much as theirs, and I couldn't bear the thought of our family's legacy dying on my watch. My resignation from the hotel group in San Francisco shocked my colleagues, but in my heart, it was the right move. The first few months back home were a blur of late nights and endless tasks. I replaced the outdated POS system, brought in new linens, and launched a social media campaign that caught the attention of influencers and travel bloggers. Every dollar I spent was carefully measured, every decision aimed at pulling us back from the edge. Mason, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. He'd drop by occasionally for dinner, offering ideas like, "We should get robots," or "Let's make the lobby an Instagram museum," before disappearing back to Denver for days at a time. Yet somehow, those brief appearances were enough for Mom and Dad to see him as the visionary while I was just the worker bee. Even knowing all that, nothing prepared me for the crushing disappointment of seeing them hand over my hard-won revival to Mason, the brother who had given nothing but received everything. Mason's reign as CEO began like a bad joke. Within days of the announcement, he strutted through the Alpine Crest's halls as if he owned the air itself. He started making sweeping changes without consulting anyone who actually understood hotel operations. His first move? Slashing our popular complimentary breakfast service, claiming it was a waste of money. I tried to explain, with guest satisfaction data in hand, that our breakfast ratings were a major reason travelers chose us over competitors. He barely glanced at the charts before chuckling, "Lena, numbers aren't everything. We need to be bold." That was Mason's favorite word, bold. But in practice, his boldness meant impulsive decisions that undermined everything I'd rebuilt. He removed the local art displays I'd curated, saying they looked old-fashioned, and replaced them with cheap generic prints he found online. He shortened staff shifts to cut costs, leaving us scrambling during peak checkouts. The staff who had been rejuvenated by our recent successes now walked on eggshells, fearful of Mason's erratic mood swings. One morning, I arrived early to find Mason in the middle of firing Sophia, our head housekeeper who had given 20 years of loyal service. His reason? She was too set in her ways to adapt to his new scheduling system, a system that left critical shifts understaffed and put our cleanliness scores at risk. Seeing the humiliation on Sophia's face ignited something deep inside me. I stepped in, practically begging Mason to reconsider, but he waved me off with a smug grin. Only after hours of pleading with my parents did they agree to reverse his decision, but the damage to morale had already been done. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Sophia's tearful eyes and the exhausted faces of my staff, who had poured everything into reviving the Alpine Crest. I knew I couldn't let Mason destroy what we'd worked so hard to build. The final straw came when I tried to speak to my parents, laying out the facts, improved bookings, guest reviews praising the renovations, and the steady climb in our financial projections. Dad avoided my eyes, swirling his coffee as if the answers lay at the bottom of his mug. Mom squeezed my hand gently, but looked at me like a child needing comfort. "Sweetheart, you have to give Mason time. He has wonderful ideas. He just needs to find his footing." As I drove home that evening, the frustration inside me reached a fever pitch. That's when I spotted the old Evergreen Lodge, a once grand property now sitting abandoned near the base of the mountain. It had better views, more acreage, and was even closer to the ski lifts than Alpine Crest. The for sale sign outside looked like a beacon in the fading light. I pulled into the empty lot, my mind spinning with possibilities. For nearly an hour, I sat in my car, staring at the dilapidated facade and replaying every instance my efforts had been overlooked. Every time Mason's empty promises were praised, every sacrifice I'd made that was dismissed. By the time I turned the key in the ignition, a sense of resolve had replaced my frustration. That night, I called my realtor. The owners of Evergreen Lodge were desperate to sell. Within days, I was scheduling viewings and crunching numbers, my mind alive with plans for what could be. A hotel crafted entirely by my vision, without anyone standing in the way. The weeks that followed were a blur of blueprints, meetings with contractors, and late-night brainstorming sessions. The moment I set foot inside Evergreen Lodge, dusty, dark, and echoing with the ghosts of its former glory, I knew exactly what it could become. Every cracked tile and sagging beam was a challenge I was determined to conquer. I poured myself into the renovation, designing each space with purpose. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing the mountains, cozy lounges with fireplaces for après-ski evenings, and a restaurant showcasing local produce in creative, seasonal menus. I named it The Summit, a name that declared my ambition and reflected what I wanted guests to feel. Elevated, inspired, and part of something extraordinary. Mason could keep his hollow bravado. I had a tangible dream taking shape, brick by brick. Word spread quickly through town. Some whispered that I was trying to destroy my own family by opening a competing hotel. Others, especially those who had seen my sacrifices at Alpine Crest, quietly offered support. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from former coworkers, contractors, and even old-school friends who wanted to help. One by one, some of Alpine Crest's most dedicated staff began approaching me, asking if there might be a place for them at the summit. They were tired of Mason's chaos and craved the respect and stability I promised. Meanwhile, across town, Mason's grand ideas began to unravel spectacularly. His flashy social media campaigns brought in influencers expecting perfection, but encountering inconsistent service, dusty hallways, and staff too overworked to keep up. The glowing reviews I had worked so hard to cultivate turned sour almost overnight. Guests complained of delayed check-ins, dirty rooms, and indifferent attitudes. Each week, occupancy dropped a little more. By the end of the second month of Mason's reign, Alpine Crest had to slash its room rates just to stay afloat. Mom and Dad started calling more often, though their conversations shifted from pride to unease. They asked vague questions about how I was doing and how the summit's construction was going, never quite acknowledging the struggles at Alpine Crest. I kept my answers polite but brief, unwilling to offer them the comfort of knowing I'd be their safety net if Mason's blunders brought them to ruin. The day our first team meeting at the summit's future site took place, I stood with my new staff, many of them refugees from Alpine Crest. On the balcony of what would soon be our grand lobby, snow fell gently around us, blanketing the valley in pristine white. I laid out my vision, a hotel that prioritized not only luxury, but community, sustainability, and genuine hospitality, a place where every team member's ideas would matter. Their eyes shone with excitement, a mirror of my own. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a chance to create the kind of hotel I'd always dreamed of. The kind Alpine Crest could have been if anyone had trusted me. Even as construction crews began tearing down rotting walls and building anew, Mason was busy planning lavish parties to distract from his sinking reputation. Rumors spread of his temper tantrums and his desperate offers to local tour companies to bring guests to Alpine Crest. But the more Mason flailed, the more determined I became to make the summit a success. Not to spite him, but to prove, to myself most of all, that I could thrive on my own terms. 6 months after I first dialed my realtor's number in a fit of desperation and determination, the summit's grand opening finally arrived. The day dawned crisp and bright, with fresh snow sparkling under the morning sun. As I stood by the entrance, greeting our first guests, my heart swelled with a quiet pride I'd never known before. The scent of fresh pine and coffee drifted from the lobby cafe, mingling with the hum of excited conversations. My vision had come to life, not just in the marble floors or modern mountain decor, but in the warmth that radiated from every staff member, many of whom had followed me from Alpine Crest to this new beginning. Word of the summit's luxurious amenities spread fast. By the end of our first week, social media was buzzing with glowing reviews about the eco-friendly spa, our rooftop lounge with sweeping mountain views, and the personalized service that made every guest feel like royalty. It wasn't long before our booking calendar filled up months in advance. The local newspaper's front page declared, "The summit raises the bar for Aspen hospitality." Meanwhile, Mason's kingdom crumbled in real time. Alpine Crest's once proud reputation was now a cautionary tale. Complaints about cleanliness, rude staff, and maintenance issues multiplied. Each time I passed the old lodge on my way to the summit, I noticed fewer cars in the parking lot. Rumors swirled that Mason had started cutting corners even further, canceling staff training programs, and ignoring safety inspections to squeeze out a few more dollars. I tried not to revel in his failure, but it was impossible not to feel vindicated when guests who once stayed at Alpine Crest began flocking to the summit instead. Many of them recognized me from my days behind the old front desk. They'd pull me aside to whisper how grateful they were for the new hotel, praising every detail I had agonized over for months. My parents, however, were a different story. They refused to visit the summit, choosing instead to cling to the myth that Mason would turn things around. On the rare occasions I joined them for family dinners, conversation was tense and stilted. Mom's eyes would flicker with something like regret, but she'd quickly mask it with forced cheer. Dad would clear his throat and change the subject whenever I tried to talk about the hotel. Neither of them asked about the reality unfolding before their eyes. Yet even without their support, I felt something shift inside me. Each day, I walked through the summit's busy lobby, past happy guests and confident staff. My old need for their approval began to fade. I wasn't building this hotel to prove myself to them anymore. I was doing it for me, and for the people who believed in what we were creating together. Meanwhile, Mason's desperation grew more obvious. He started hosting loud, gaudy parties in Alpine Crest's lobby, hoping to drum up attention. But photos of trashed hallways and sloppily dressed servers began circulating online, cementing the hotel's reputation as a place in decline. Longtime employees quit in waves, many calling me afterward to ask if the summit had openings. One evening, as I reviewed the summit's latest guest satisfaction scores, higher than I'd ever dared to hope, I looked out across the snowy valley toward Alpine Crest's darkened windows. The lights flickered unsteadily, a fading monument to misplaced trust, and I knew deep in my bones that I'd made the right choice, to stop waiting for recognition and start building a future on my own terms. It was a cold morning when I found my parents sitting nervously in the glass-walled reception area of the summit, their breath fogging the air as they waited for me. The moment I saw them, Mom fidgeting with the clasp on her purse, Dad studying the floor like it held all life's answers, I knew this wasn't a social visit. My assistant knocked gently on my office door. "Lena, your parents are here," she whispered, her eyes full of concern. I took a deep breath before stepping out to greet them. They looked so small seated beneath the soaring ceiling I had designed, the lobby bustling with guests and staff who moved with a confidence that made me proud. Mom's eyes darted around, taking in the luxurious finishes and happy guests, her mouth a thin, tense line. "Lena, we need your help," Dad began, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. I led them into my office, shutting the door behind us. The silence that felt heavier than the mountain snow outside. Alpine Crest was collapsing faster than even I had realized. Their occupancy had plunged, maintenance issues had turned dangerous, and several vendors were threatening lawsuits over unpaid invoices. Mason was refusing to take responsibility, blaming everyone from the front desk clerks to the weather. Worst of all, the bank was ready to call in the lodge's loans, which could force my parents to sell the hotel, or even lose their home. "We know we made mistakes," Mom said softly, her eyes finally meeting mine. "But you're the only one who can save it now. Please come back and help Mason. Teach him what you know." For a long moment, I said nothing. The room felt suffocatingly still. My mind flashed through everything I'd sacrificed. The sleepless nights, the personal savings I'd poured into Alpine Crest, the heartbreak of watching my work dismissed simply because Mason had the right last name. I thought about the summit's staff, people who believed in me, who had taken risks to join me, people I couldn't abandon just because my parents had realized, too late, what I'd been trying to show them all along. "I offered to help you both before," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "I gave up my life in San Francisco because I wanted to save Alpine Crest. But you chose Mason. You put your faith in him when everything pointed to him not being ready, and now you're asking me to fix it." Mom's face crumpled, but I continued before she could speak. "I can't come back. That chapter of my life is closed. I will give you advice if you want it, share suppliers, strategies, even suggest new staff training programs, but I won't step in to clean up Mason's mess." They stared at me, stunned. Dad's mouth opened and closed as if he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Mom's eyes shimmered with tears she fought not to shed. I stood up, signaling the conversation was over. "I hope you find a way to save Alpine Crest," I added quietly. "But I need to protect what I've built here, and myself." That night, driving home through moonlit snow, I felt lighter than I had in years. Setting those boundaries was terrifying, but it also felt like shedding a weight I'd carried since childhood. I realized that I no longer needed their approval or validation. I had found something far more valuable: self-respect, and the courage to stand by the life I had chosen to create. Looking back on this journey, I realized it wasn't just about saving a hotel or proving a point to my family. It was about discovering who I truly was and what I truly valued. For so long, I measured my worth by how my parents saw me, by how much praise I could earn or how many sacrifices I could make to win their approval. But life has a way of teaching us that real value doesn't come from someone else's applause. It comes from the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you gave your best, stood by your principles, and chose your own path even when it meant walking alone. The summit became more than a hotel. It became a symbol of resilience, a home for people who shared a vision of kindness, excellence, and respect. In building it, I found a family bound not by blood, but by shared commitment and mutual trust. Seeing former colleagues flourish, guests delighted, and our community come together reminded me why I fell in love with hospitality in the first place. Because it's about making others feel seen, safe, and valued. Something every person deserves. Yet so many spend their lives chasing in the wrong places. If there's one lesson I hope you take from this story, it's that your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. Sometimes, even the people closest to us can overlook our efforts or dismiss our dreams. That doesn't mean your dedication is wasted or your talents are meaningless. It means you have a choice. Keep pouring yourself into someone else's vision, or take the leap to build your own. It's terrifying to set boundaries with the people you love, to accept that you might never get the apology or recognition you crave. But I promise you, on the other side of that fear is a peace and freedom that feels like finally breathing fresh air after years underwater. When you stand firm in your own light, the right people who respect you, who celebrate you, will find you. And together, you can create something even more beautiful than you dreamed. I know many of you have faced moments like mine, times when your loyalty was taken for granted, when your contributions were ignored, or when you had to choose between your own happiness and the expectations of others. I'd love to hear your stories. Have you ever had to step away from someone or something that didn't value you? How did you find the courage to start over? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone else to make a change they've been too afraid to take. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories about resilience, personal growth, and the incredible things we can achieve when we refuse to let our worth be defined by others. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing in me and in yourselves. Until next time, remember, your light is yours to shine, and you never have to dim it for anyone.